The malfunctioning lunar consciousness, or an unhealthy lunar consciousness, will exhibit the traits of the moon in Scorpio, where the moon is debilitated, and the moon is debilitated specifically in the first 3 degrees of Scorpio, because this is the zodiac sign or the energetic environment where the moon's agenda in our consciousness, it's the least compatible with. It's the least compatible with Scorpio. But this doesn't mean that if you have the moon in Scorpio, that your lunar consciousness is automatically malfunctioning. Although there is a stronger tendency for the moon to be malfunctioning in the first 30 to 40 years of your life. It's just a tendency to have the moon in Scorpio and to have a lunar consciousness that needs a little bit more work. Your moon can be in any zodiac sign, but if your lunar consciousness is malfunctioning or is unhealthy, it's going to take on some of the characteristics of the moon debilitated in Scorpio. So in Vedic astrology, there are a number of symbolic representations that define each zodiac sign. We're not just limited to the scorpion as the showing the symbolic representations of what Scorpio is. And one symbol that I really love and I find very helpful is that each sign has a location in the world. And the location of Scorpio is a hole where the scorpion lives. And I'm going to take a little bit of liberty and expand this location to include the location of still water. And why water? Because Scorpio is a water sign. And why still water? Because Scorpio is a fixed sign. And so water that is very slow to move. And I like this symbol of still water because a very scorpionic quality is when a person has a strong Scorpio in their chart or an emphasized Scorpio in their chart. There are people that live the adage of still water runs deep, which is the idea that people who are not very outwardly expressive, they have a very great depth to them. They're very deep people. And I like to picture Scorpio as the deep ocean where it becomes very dark and all of a sudden these exotic fishes with the lights and the glowing, they appear out of nowhere. It's an environment that human beings are not very good at surviving in. And there's no place in the world that can be that's more frightening to a human being specifically to explore that part of the earth, the dark, deep ocean. And it's a very frightening, and that word is important, frightening experience for a human being specifically. And another way I like to think about Scorpio is like a shipwreck. And it's that same kind of frightening area where you could have eels that pop out of the corner and they pop out of the holes of a sunken ship. It's just it's a location in the, not super deep ocean. It doesn't have to be in the deep ocean, but a shipwreck is this very eerie kind of place because you have this ship that was once alive and bustling and now it's stagnant. There's mold growing on it or there's algae growing all over. It's not what it used to be. So the deep dark ocean or the shipwreck are very Scorpio locations because it's the zodiac sign where we dive deep into our psychology and confront semi-conscious or sometimes completely unconscious fears or frightening or scary aspects of ourselves, which are the occulted or the hidden aspects of ourselves, the taboo things that are not supposed to be mentioned in polite standard conversation. And it's the otherworldly or the uncommon states of mind that very often that drugs induce in people. And doesn't have to be just drugs, but it's this place of mystery, you can say. And it's also a very private place. And it can also be very frightening, but it can be a very transformative place because we are confronting and we're forced to look at these deep fears and these unconscious or semi-conscious but uncomfortable aspects of our personal life and those areas of life in general. And it's not the place for a weak-minded person, and it's in no way an easy stroll in the park on a sunny day and having a picnic in nature, which is an activity that's very easy and tranquil, and human beings are very adaptable very easily in that situation, a nice stroll through the park. So that's the opposite of Scorpio. So as we discussed in the first moon video, It's the ability of the moon to adapt to our environment that puts us in a position to receive what we need to feel content and nourished by life. But when the moon is in Scorpio, the moon is trying to adapt to this frightening environment. And this creates a very tumultuous and intense mental posturing and intense subjective experience. And it's because it's trying to adapt to an environment that isn't very naturally pleasing and easygoing, like the walk in the park. So when the lunar consciousness is in an unhealthy state or is malfunctioning, the person, what they're doing is that they're habituating themselves to experiencing the dark sides of life and this realm of danger and the supernatural forces that can become very disruptive to the day-to-day flow and getting our basic needs met. As I said in the first video, the moon is our perception of the environment. And when your environment always feels like this scorpionic place, then you get used to the frightening and dark sides of life, which can be fascinating to explore, but it makes the flow of our life and doing the simple things in life much more difficult to do. And it's a very interesting place to focus one's attention and perception in the mysteries and the occult of life, the Scorpio, the deep dark ocean of psychological forces that are not present on the surface personality. And some people love these dangerous places and situations, but the unhealthy moon wants to feel comforted by these intrinsically uncomfortable things in life. And just as a reminder, you don't have to have the moon in Scorpio to be a person like this. You can have the moon in any sign and you can start to become habituated to these uncomfortable and disruptive parts of life. And then the moon, what it ends up doing is it gets very used to these types of kind of dangerous and threatening things of the world, too used to it, you could say. So Scorpio it's the feminine side of Mars. It's ruled by Mars. And Mars is the planet that we use to take on challenges, and it does battle in life. And so since it's a feminine sign, what feminine signs do is they work on our internal world. So Scorpio is the sign of doing battle and confronting with the inner conflicts of the dark and mysterious psychological forces within us. So when the part of human nature, the moon force of human nature, being put into this battlefield of the dark psychological forces, the moon is trying to be nourished by the world. It wants to receive good things in the world and get one's needs met. But in this dark world of Scorpio, or when you're habituating your mind to the dark psychological forces, you get habituated to battling the dark psychological things happening within us. And so what happens is a person can very easily become way too absorbed and sucked into this dark and scary environment and the uncomfortable environment that's within us all, but getting sucked in and being way too absorbed or absorbing way too much of this specific part of life. So the unhealthy lunar consciousness creates this perception of the world as a constant struggle against threats, things that are threatening the person. And it can make a person feel very insecure about their self-image. And when the moon is unhealthy, the person can be prone to defining themselves by their traumas or traumatic events or traumatic situations. Their self-image, being so used to perceiving these dark things, their self-image becomes defined by that. The moon is our self-image. And sometimes these traumas, they're very, very real. They really happened. Sometimes they're imagined or exaggerated because the moon is also our imagination. We're imagining things, we're creating things, or imagining that something will be traumatic or was traumatic when it was less traumatic than say the experience of another person. For one person, it can roll off their back, but for the unhealthy moon, the situation was traumatizing, and they absorbed something to a very extreme degree that causes them to identify themselves very closely. Their self-image and self-conception is very much defined by traumas. So since the moon is the divine feminine, which is pure receptivity, the moon with scorpionic qualities to it, and so the unhealthy lunar consciousness in general, has adapted themselves to receiving dangerous things. And this often means conspicuous people who are very unstable, people with ulterior motives. They can become habituated to violent situations and just playing with fire, so to say. The lunar consciousness is absorbing a lot of these parts of life too much. And these kinds of experiences in general make life more difficult and, if anything, more psychologically draining, because it's based more on obstacles than on opportunities. Mars, that rules Scorpio, likes being in Scorpio in his own sign, because it's Mars's job in our consciousness, and it's his agenda to be dealing with these and battling these aspects of life. He likes to be in Scorpio because, a strong Mars in Scorpio can fight that good fight against one's own dark psychological side. But when a person finds themselves surrounded by these challenging things over and over again, the person can very easily create this emotional intuitive response and feeling that they are constantly being victimized by the outside world, this dangerous environment. They're always absorbing these things because they're always at least feel like they're surrounded by threats, and sometimes very much are habituating themselves, and they find their environment to be very threatening. And so in the very least, they're perceiving that there are many threats around them. So this is leading up to probably the most important aspect of the unhealthy lunar consciousness, is perceiving oneself, creating one's self identity and one's self-image as the perpetual victim, either always or consistently on the receiving end of bad things, at least perceiving things to be that way. So when we're talking about people up to the ages of about 18 or 20 years old, up until they become an official adult at the age of 18 or 20, 21. And these people have lived lives that have been surrounded by threats. Maybe they have had a life they've been oppressed, literally, and their childhood was very difficult on them, and they got habituated to a very dark environment. This is a real thing that happens to people. Well, what's interesting is actually these people, when they have a tough upbringing and tough childhood, these people are actually very resilient adults, and they actually have a way to them that can handle dangers and handle difficult situations much better into their adult years than a person who's surrounded by wealth and an easygoing environment. Because once those people grow up and they see that the world is filled with conflicts and threats and danger, and it's an unaccommodating place, they don't have the childhood having to deal with those conflicts on a regular basis. So people who grew up living literally were victimized or lived in an oppressed kind of existence, they kind of build up this armor. And it's a positive, you could say, of people that have to deal with difficult things in their early life, that people who don't have to deal with difficult things in their early life, they don't have that. You could call it a benefit, but it's just a result of what happens living in a world that is very hostile to you in your formative years, your childhood. But when we're talking about people who are grown adults over the age of 25, 26, and these people are posturing themselves as victims of life, who are constantly being oppressed by someone, some group, the system, any system in general, and even things that are like the weather that aren't directly threatening them, but they feel threatened by it. This is the hallmark of a toxic lunar consciousness. And we see this throughout the world today. And what has happened is there was this ascendance into popular discourse, into the mainstream, this intellectual paradigm called critical theory. And what critical theory does, it separates the world into two groups, oppressors and the oppressed. And what this has caused is it has caused toxic lunar consciousness in general. Now, this is a very controversial and sensitive topic, of course, and especially so when you look at it from the spiritual perspective. This idea that there is no such thing as a victim, because we are all subject to the actions and samskaras that we've accumulated over lifetimes, and our current life is subjected to those samskaras, or the impressions and impurities on our soul. So we're subjected to the experiences that best support our growth into a self-actualized person. And oftentimes those experiences are not going to be desirable. We don't want to feel those experiences. And some of those experiences require us to suffer. Many of those experiences require us to suffer in some way, shape, or form. Now, this isn't justifying evil. It's not rationalizing abuse. It's simply saying that there is a growth opportunity for every soul when you take the attitude that looks at trying situations and difficult things in life from a multi-lifetime perspective, and that you can always grow from these things. And again, it's not to say that the abusers have a job to do to abuse you. No, we need to work on making a better world where people are not abused in that way. But the perspective I'm saying is that to take the attitude that life presented you with a situation that may have been negative, a negative experience, and to not turn that into a way of saying, I'm a victim, I'm always going to be a victim. You have to look at it from a way of, how can I grow? What did this teach me? And how can I avoid these situations in the future? What did I learn from these experiences? But I find that many, if not most people, are not really ready to look at their life from that higher spiritual perspective, that multi-life perspective. Most people just see what's happening in their current life, and they posture themselves or perceive, since the moon is the ego's perception, that life is unfair and that they're always going to be victimized because, again, the moon is feeling surrounded by threats to their well-being. It all comes back to what you're perceiving the world to be, the moon. When you're always perceiving threats around you, you're going to be in this unhealthy, toxic lunar mind state, this attitude that the world is out to get you. So one of the most important aspects and things to remember about the unhealthy lunar consciousness is to posture oneself and to create the mental attitude of, I am not a victim, even though undesirable or negative things have happened to me in my past. And my present and my future are not going to be defined by them. Because again, in the previous video, we talked about how the moon is our ego's understanding of the past, the present, and the future, and how that creates our self-identity and what we're building our self-identity into based on essentially time and what we're imagining our life to be happening in the future. So such an important aspect of the moon is this attitude, how we're posturing our mindset, how we look onto the world, and not just that we're receiving this information of the world, but how we organize that perception and how we look out into the world. We don't see the world as it is. We can do our best to see the world as it is, but we see the world as we are. And that is the moon, the lunar part of us. We see the world as we are. So one way to work with the unhealthy lunar consciousness is to convert this attitude of victim to victor. And the word victor in this context is very important because remember, Mars is the force in our consciousness that does battle with obstacles to achieve a victory. So when you have the mindset of a victor or of an anti-fragile mindset, that things that happen to you that cause you to confront your weaknesses or challenges to your life, they all make you stronger. And you get stronger and you become more resilient because you're having to deal with you've dealt with the threats and the dangers of life. And that's what Mars is doing in our consciousness. The moon comes into play because the moon takes that attitude as, I have a strong Mars and I can deal with threats and nothing is going to break me, and things are going to make me, these difficult parts of life are only going to make my self-identity more stronger and healthier, because I know I have the ability to deal with difficult parts of my life. And most importantly, I'm not defined by traumas and bad things that may have happened to me. It all comes back to that attitude, which is the perception of yourself. So another tendency of the moon in Scorpio is that when you're in the mode of having this constant sense that you're surrounded by danger, what it does is it closes a person off eventually. These are people that have or the toxic lunar consciousness are people that have difficulty opening up to receive love in their life, to receive the good things in their life. And remember, it's not just the moon in Scorpio, it's people that have this unhealthy lunar consciousness. And what this does is that it breeds distrustfulness to the outside world, especially in the way of thinking that no one understands you and that no one could understand you because of X, Y, or Z, anything. The unhealthy moon is extremely guarded. It's an extremely guarded person. And it has this excessive amount of self-protection and an excessive amount of also trying to protect other people. And one way to imagine this, or one way to think about it, think of the parents who are always sheltering their children and not allowing them to learn to deal with the difficulties of life or the difficult parts of existence. What that is the lunar consciousness, the nurturing part of our consciousness that is there to help empathize and comfort other people who are in, any kind of mind state. But it's the part of us that connects, the empathy connects our subjective emotional experience with others through this nurturing ability. But seeing everything as a threat, or for the parents, seeing all of these threats to the children, it turns into toxic parenting or the helicopter parenting, because they're in this fear-based mindset that is perceiving that everything's going to hurt the children. And so they nurture based on fear. And it's a closed off way of parenting, instead, again, of working on building resilience in the children and learning healthily how to overcome obstacles. So another character trait of someone who has this kind of closed off posturing to life because of the constant perception of threats is that when they actually do choose to open up, they want to control everything about that situation. Just like the controlling parental figure. The parental figure wants to close the children off. And what they're doing is they're trying to control and to manage the potential threats, because they see threats all around their children to a very unhealthy extent. So not just the case with parenting, but it's also very true when a closed off person, when they find a partner or a potential partner that they want to share their heart with, and they want to open up their own emotional world. What ends up happening is that these people can be extremely intense because they feel like these opportunities are so few and far between to actually have the chance to open up to someone, because they're so used to being closed off that they create this really intense controlling attitude. They're not able to accept other people for their own flaws or for who they are. Instead, what they end up doing from the inner desire to control is that they'll manipulate and try to manage the situation way too much so that the other person fits into their narrow set of needs that they've created for themselves. Because remember, the moon is seeing what do I need in life and what do I want in life, and being able to distinguish between the two. When this person comes along that, wow, I can actually finally open myself up to them. Well, I can't let this chance go. So they'll do anything to make sure that this opportunity to open up doesn't slip through their fingers again. And what that results in is manipulating the other person and wanting that other person to be exactly what they believe that they need in their life. So the interesting thing about emotionally closed off moon people with the Scorpio style protective posturing that they have, because Scorpio is, it's a scorpion is not a ferocious creature, but it's a dangerous creature. It has the stinger. It could at any point sting you. And so they have this kind of threatening, closed off, don't get too close to me posture, kind of like the goth kids who wear the spiky clothing, the black clothing. Well, what's interesting about these people who act like that, the goth kids included, is that usually these are the most sensitive people there are in the world. And what has happened is that usually these people, what has happened is that they've been emotionally hurt in the past, and they still haven't processed the pain or the trauma from those experiences, and then become stronger because of it. And like I said, we're talking about how to take that attitude of victor to be able to grow and to advance oneself despite the negative things that happen in your life. Well, the unhealthy moon person, they become obsessed, and sometimes just subconsciously, but they become obsessed or so preoccupied with the pain and the trauma that it's very difficult for them to process it. And at the very least, they're extremely sensitive about it. And they really don't want anyone to get too close, because just one little touch on that sensitive area is going to cause flashbacks, or it's going to bring back so many past memories that they just would rather block it off subconsciously or block other people from getting too close to them. So something that the toxic lunar consciousness person needs to do is to really start working on not creating extremely specific and strict guidelines to the idea of what they need and what they want from life. Because we talked about in the first video, the moon helps us grow in wisdom and self-understanding when we begin to see and distinguish between the difference between, yeah, I really wanted that, but I really don't need that. And there are things that I actually need in my life that I never thought but I never really wanted it, but for self-growth, I need that. So an unhealthy lunar consciousness needs to begin to open up and not have these very specific needs, because they can be very extremist in a certain way, and in a certain way of those needs and want, or what they believe that they need. And what happens is that they miss out on parts of life. Life will bring opportunities to them, because they're closed off and have a very strict set of beliefs of what they need, or beliefs of what they think they need or what they want, that they miss the chances to actually learn about, yeah, I never considered that possibility, but when I got it, I realized that was missing the whole time. I really needed that in my life. And if it happens too late in life, where they are very extremist about their sets of beliefs of what they believe they need, they're going to miss a lot of things, and they're not open up to things changing their mind and being able to alter their sense of self, and to really grow in that understanding of again, understanding what are our desires and what is life showing us that we need to become better people. And so that's where that extremist quality of Scorpio comes into play. That they're such intense people. They have that reputation. They're super passionate, and they want to completely control situations and control what they receive and what they give. So when the lunar consciousness is unhealthy, the person will take on this very radical form of being very, very picky about what they're open to experiencing. And then when they actually find out what they believe that they want, they'll be extremely possessive about it. And it's like do or die to them, because again, they feel like they'll never have another opportunity for something as good to come along like this. And what happens is that this kind of intensity scares other people away, and for very good reason. And like we talked, the moon shows our ability to be social, and to be able to read and perceive the room, to be able to read the emotions within other people. So what the unhealthy lunar consciousness needs to do is that they need to widen their bandwidth of their beliefs of what they believe they need, and have to adopt the attitude, or grow into the attitude of the possibility that what you believe you need is not actually what you need. So this requires adapting to the ebbs and flows in life. The unhealthy moon, the unhealthy lunar consciousness, they want the world to adapt to them. Or they are just so closed off to the world that they feel, I don't need to adapt to anyone. I'm fine how I am. And it's the wrong posture to have to the world. This is the unhealthy lunar consciousness. We need to be able to flow with the current situation, to not allow the past to define our current situation, especially when it's a negative past. You can have a negative past and it defines your situation as long as that I'm, like I said, the victor. And I'm not going to be bringing in threats into my life purposefully, and I'm not going to allow other people to take advantage of me, etc. And of course, being way too open, you're susceptible to very harmful influences, but at least you're beginning to learn about what you don't want in your life, which often is just as valuable as knowing what you do want. So about opening up, being less protective and less sensitive about your past, letting other people in, and then when things do come in, not trying to be so manipulative and controlling about those things that come into your life. Be able to change your mind, be able to flow with the present, and to be able to discover and realize that what you thought you need, you don't actually need, you just wanted it. And then put yourself in the adaptive position of being able to take those things into your life and incorporate those things you're learning into your life, so that you can then put yourself into a better position to bring good things into your life. So there's really no underestimating the importance of having a moon that is open to life's changes, and that you can change yourself. You can change your identity at any point. And that the future that you imagine yourself living, it's going to change. You don't have to control the present so that it fits into this neat box of what the future is, because that's what you need. Your ideas about the future and about who you are going to change, and be open to that. Other people are going to change you. Be open to them. They're going to change you in unexpected ways. The unhealthy moon is very risk averse in this sense. They are very like in still water. Imagine being a human in still water, deep under the ocean. It's hard to move around. It's hard to flow in that deep water where there's a lot of pressure, water pressure. So when the moon is kind of stuck in that world of feeling the pressure coming in from outside, it's very hard for them to get out of that self-preservation mode, that fear-based mode. But I believe that it comes back down to being open to the potential for change and being happy to change, and that you can change yourself, and that your self-identity is always, whether you realize it or not, it's going to change, and be open to that. And not to be traumatized and defined by negative things that happen in your past. Move on. There's much more to come. There's a future to be living. Don't get stuck in that dark world and ruminate on those dark thoughts, so that you can put yourself and adapt yourself into a position in life to surround yourself by new opportunities, and so that you can begin receiving the good things from life, the things that you want, and then realize I wanted that, but it's not what I needed. You have to be able to adapt and position yourself so you can learn about these things, and what you'll discover is that what you wanted is different from what you needed, and then that's going to propel even more self-growth and self-understanding.